Hello, welcome to another Vault Fast Industry News Show. We have loads to get through this week. We're just going to get straight to it, jump right in. We're going to be talking about Ben Sessa, recent trial and banning. We're going to be talking about a Dutch pilot update, Teeside Cannabis Club. We're going to be talking about Oregon, going back to criminalising drug users. We're going to be talking about France's banning of flower on the medical market. And then we're going to finish off by looking at a German hip-hop influencer who has endorsed a medical cannabis product. So loads to get through, Katya. Let's jump straight in with probably the biggest,
most controversial story. I feel like all of the news stories we have today are like quite punchy. There's quite a lot to go through. So let's get straight into it. Ben Sessa has been barred from practicing medicine for a year after there was a long trial after which he had a sexual relationship with a former patient who then committed suicide. Matha Busby wrote a really good piece for Double Blind about this. It's a very shocking, disgusting, awful piece of news. For those of you that don't know, Ben Sessa is quite prolific in the psychedelic space. I think he co-founded Breaking Convention, is involved as like a founding member at a lot of psychedelic research companies. I think MindMed had him on his board. Obviously has made a name for himself around psychedelic research. So this definitely tarnishes and puts a bad flavor on the psychedelic space in many senses.
It's awful. It's absolutely awful. Because I've worked in drug treatment for many years, I've seen firsthand like the vulnerability that people can present with when they try to talk to you about things that mean a lot to them. And it is so unbelievably important to make sure that when you're working with vulnerable people, there is a level of due diligence and supervision and processes to prevent this sort of thing. Me and you've been chatting about it a lot since it came out. And we've had some quite interesting conversations, haven't we, around the psychedelic sector is really interesting. The opportunity that exists with psychedelic assisted therapy is really, really interesting. Yeah, it's really exciting area, pioneering medicine. It's a great area to be interested. Many of our friends and colleagues work in that sector. We know all the great stuff that they do. It's super exciting. However, it is so important for that sector to recognise that, because when we were chatting about it the other day, we were thinking about in a therapeutic setting, vulnerable people end up in therapeutic settings because they want to resolve something, want to solve something. Not there's anything wrong with that. I don't mean you're instantly vulnerable, but there's a vulnerability in sitting and going, I'm going to talk to you about some of my deepest feelings.
Yeah, this is where...
it's an intimate, vulnerable situation. But when you're like clear-headed, there's still an element of risk there, and like you definitely need strong supervision practices and procedures.
But you're sober, you're like sound mind.
You know what's going on, and you can make judgments and decisions with a level of rationality. When you then introduce
a drug that has, very, very intense psychological effects and just completely changes the way you perceive and think and communicate, there's so many things that can go wrong there, and you need to make sure that the person that's delivering the therapy session is, there's complete trust, there's, a high level of due diligence. Because there's so much that can go wrong, so much that vulnerability that you can exploit towards that patient.
And think about the added power dynamic. So a normal therapeutic relationship, there's obviously a power dynamic that the therapist has to try and address, because it's like you're coming to me to talk to me. I might impart some advice, or like I'm kind of in charge of this session, and the therapist obviously has to try and address that and find a relationship that doesn't make the other person feel like there's a huge power imbalance. When you're in a psychedelic assisted therapy session, not only is there that natural power imbalance that needs to be addressed, but then the other person's giving you drugs. Yeah. I mean, like, it's giving you drugs. And what we must be really clear is we don't know what happened in this case. So we're not saying, we're just making this conversation parallels just about the sector. This isn't anything related to that case. We don't know the ins and outs of
the actual therapy that took
other than what's been written in pieces that we've read that's publicly available. But when that therapist is then administering drugs, and we know that when you give someone drugs like MDMA or psilocybin or whatever else, it can create increased empathy and connection with someone sat next to you. Yeah, like you can be sat next to someone and suddenly think, "Oh, you're my best friend. I love you more than anything on earth."
There's also that, like, I don't know what the psychological term is, but like the kind of like savior complex. I know it happens to people that have like near-death experiences and that get saved, and they like, it happened for soldiers in the war where they like fell in love with the nurses that were like taking care of them because they were like, oh my God, you've like saved my life. And so I feel like a very similar dynamic can happen with drugs like this, because you've got this like, oh my God, I've had this like realization, and like, you know, my mind's been open to this, and I suddenly feel like, you know, I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. You can see how that's, you know, a very intense experience, and you could, experience a very strong connection with that therapist and that person that's delivering the session.
That might actually be that bit might be one of the key factors in why psychedelic assisted therapy is an interesting area. It's like, right now I can really open up. That's great, but it just makes it so vitally important that the people who work in that sector are good actors and have good management and control of their morals and their principles
and just good intentions. Because I feel like we've said this a lot. There's the psychedelics and cannabis space is filled with amazing people that really want to make a difference, that are just incredible people. But, you know, it can draw people that have bad intentions to, you know, to be lured towards vulnerable people and exploit those vulnerable people. So
and there's a warning in this as well. So if we think about psychedelic assisted therapy, and this is something else we've reflected on the past couple of weeks, you think about psychedelic assisted therapy in that environment and forum where you should have structured supervision procedures. You should, like when I worked in treatment, people would know where you're meeting clients, like you would see an open diary. So like if someone won't be able to, I'm just going to go meet the client in the pub or whatever, you'd be like, well, hang on, where have you been? You should have, in those sort of settings, structure that prevents this kind of vile, shocking, awful behaviour. However, and for many places, hopefully they will create systems which you know avoid that and keep a check on people, or just keep people like this out of the industry. But most psychedelic assisted therapy exists out there on the illicit market. The illicit market is a weird phrase for it, but it's illegal.
There's all sorts of like psychedelic retreats, and again, like I'm sure that lots of them are fantastic.
Absolutely,
but the vast majority of them are fantastic. But
despite illegal.
Yeah,
we're not encouraging anybody to commit illegal activity. But I'm sure they're very positive experiences for a lot of people.
But within that, you know, there's no regulation. It's just like the illicit market with drugs. You don't know what you're getting, and so there's no level of regulation and like standard or, you know, protocol that you can adhere to. So, you know, if this sort of behavior is happening in, you know, the regulated or you know, amongst doctors that are in the regulated psychedelic space, you know, just imagine what's going on in the the illegal.
People are making themselves really vulnerable. We were thinking, because there was a case actually. Do you remember I was watching it last year? There was a case in the US of a guy that was like abused a girl, and there was a video of it. And maybe I remember I was watching it and being like, "This is disgusting. How is this?"
Yeah, well, I mean, you think about like the roots of the psychedelic space, you know, Timothy Leary and, you know, the 60s and stuff. And I mean, just look at like the CIA and MK Ultra. Like we've got, I think there's a bunch of articles on our site around the kind of dark side and the weird and wonderful world of psychedelics. And, you know, some of the stuff is vile and really disturbing. And so, you know, if that's where the kind of roots of psychedelics came from, that sort of pattern of behavior will continue unless you have a really, really stringent regulation.
Agreed.
And I mean, the main thing that the takeaway from this story is I can't believe he's only been barred from medicine for a year. But I don't
understand that. I don't understand.
Yeah, but I with a lot of these companies distancing themselves from him, I hope that it means that this will just, you know, end his career and he's no longer going to be involved in the psychedelic space as, you know, he should be.
Yeah, I think there should be strong questions after the community that engage with people that have behaved in a way like that. Like, there's just no... Awful story. Don't ever want to read something like that again, right? It's just grim. It's just kind of grim.
Yeah, definitely. Not the nicest story
to start out with. Nice and catchy. I decided they wanted these.
Well, let's move on to another story.
Yeah, another good news story.
So the Dutch pilot scheme, which finally went through in December after like years and years and years, Amsterdam, the municipality of Amsterdam, it's a mouthful, is voted to not take part. So they've been one of the Dutch cities that have been left out of taking part in the controlled sale of legal cannabis. And yeah, I think the expansion of this would require existing law to change. So I think it's pretty clear from this that policymakers want to kind of block the expansion of cannabis reform. And I suppose Amsterdam in many ways is seen as like the pinnacle of normalization of the drug, because everyone, you know, when they think of Netherlands, they think of Amsterdam as it's the capital. So I guess blocking the sale of the drug in Amsterdam is kind of a sign that they're trying to limit the experiment. I know that there's Breda and Tilburg that were the first to start out with the cannabis experiment, and it has expanded to a bunch of different cities and municipalities. But yeah, I don't know how much it will affect the actual experiment. I guess results might be a bit skewed because obviously Amsterdam has the largest population, it's the biggest city. But I feel like if anything, it's just a sign that they're trying to stamp out the experiment in some ways.
It's really frustrating, isn't it? This kind of like conservatism that we're seeing in
Europe, just generally,
particularly countries that have
been so liberal with cannabis.
Like huge strides forward in normalisation of cannabis. I guess this gets wrapped up in the tensions that exist in Amsterdam around drug use generally that have been there for
I mean, this isn't the first story. I mean, the few times I've been to Amsterdam, I mean, it's filled with like British tourists, like lads on tours.
Yeah, you can imagine.
You can imagine as a citizen, and as a policymaker in Amsterdam, it's like, okay, maybe we should change this because we don't want Brits on tours coming here to get high.
When I spent many years living in York and up north, and that's sort of like a stag hen do town, and honestly, it's so annoying. It was so incredibly annoying if you wanted to do anything on a Saturday or a Sunday in town. You just get huge. You can imagine the pictures.
Well, it's similar in Bath where I went to uni. Saturday night, like students would not go into town because it was like a locals night, and Bath is the number one hen party capital of the UK.
For hens, yeah.
Yeah, for hens.
Yeah.
There's because it's kind of classy. There's a spa. There's nice, yeah. Obviously, it get to 9 p.m. and the hen do's, they're all like battered, puking in the streets and stuff. So that's also annoying. Like, and as a student,
so it moves you away, doesn't it? It kind of you can be really liberal, but then if you're like,
it's like the not in my backyard vibe. This is just annoying.
NIMBY life. So like, I think there's that going on in Amsterdam. And also, I just think Europe has in the past couple of years become really cautious about cannabis reform. I think there's a huge misconception. That's not even a word. I think there's a huge chunk of the cannabis industry globally who are looking at Europe and going like, "Oh, Europe's doing great. It's on the path to reform," but they don't appreciate.
Like when you dig into the detail,
there's worry. There are problems there, and there's definitely support for decriminalisation and the kind of light touch of drug policy. But as soon as you start going beyond that, you do meet quite significant resistance, as we're seeing in Germany, as we're seeing here with the Dutch pilot. There's a lot of work to be done to move Europe into a recreational landscape.
Well, it's all about I think Europe's we shouldn't be criminalizing. I think we're getting to the point where it's like, we shouldn't be criminalizing people that use cannabis. That's silly. And obviously cannabis can have amazing medical benefits, and it's safer than other drugs, but it's still not very safe, and blah blah blah. So I think when you get to the point of trying to normalize the drug and just normalize use, that's where policymakers start to get a bit freaked out.
And they also just politicians are so frustrating to work with and engage with at the moment. I say that with no disrespect to any of the politicians we engage, are all lovely and really good. But they care really deeply about those kind of issues which don't have a really clear, obvious majority. They tread so lightly on subjects where they think, well, actually, 30-40% of the public might be against this. And in that world now where people are just constantly looking for lines of attack and absorbing information on social media, this is the sort of thing where you can imagine policymakers being like, do you know what, let's vote against this because we don't want to upset the residents of Amsterdam who might vote against us. That sensitivity is just really frustrating. And it also calls for more work in Europe, I think, to raise the profile of what recreational can look like and the positives around it, and it needs some kind of political will.
Yeah, because I think the association with cannabis in Amsterdam from residents is going to be, understandably so, because they associate it with tourists coming into coffee shops, not really understanding their cannabis tolerance, getting battered and just, you know, mixing cannabis with alcohol and all sorts of other drugs, which, you know, that's not what like a responsible, good cannabis market looks like. And the fact that, you know, I think a lot of people assume that cannabis is legal in Amsterdam, which it isn't, it's just tolerated. So I think there's a lot of misconceptions around what legal cannabis use can look like, because you took politicians to Canada and they were all like, oh, it's a bit boring.
Yeah,
like
it's quite a boring market. Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's a lot of like unlearning and just like reframing of what cannabis would look like in Amsterdam and just across the Netherlands in general and Europe.
Go on, and give us something positive. We're going to go downhill again.
There's a positive, but then it's just, it's not very positive. One positive.
One positive news story.
There's some great coverage about the Teeside Cannabis Club in a local press paper. I think it was like the Teeside Gazette, the Teeside Local, from Sarah Sinclair. And it was a great piece that covered harm reduction and the kind of community aspect to social clubs like this. And just the benefits of cannabis social clubs and how they protect patients, create a safe atmosphere where cannabis users are welcome. It was a really nice piece. I hope it kind of raises awareness of you know, the positives of cannabis and the fact that, you know, patients can go to this club to medicate. I think it's the oldest cannabis club in the UK. It's been around.
I think so. Yeah. I've known since. I remember chatting to them back in like 2017. People always this perception I'm like anti-cannabis clubs, stuff I've said online. But I think cannabis clubs are great. I think they're awesome as long as they're not run by gangs. In Spain, then I think they're great. I think bringing people together to enjoy something, share passions, and just have a safe space to create normalisation, push back against stigma is absolutely mint. I'm interested in what the model can look like in Germany to create sensible jobs, and you know what I mean. I want cannabis to be exciting. I want it to be this I want normalisation to stretch beyond cannabis clubs and beyond the street through regulated markets. But I think cannabis clubs as a concept are absolutely great. And I kind of love the fact that despite our law, which I wish was different,
schemes like this
I know it's a grey area and a challenging area to operate, but the work that they've done to have that in just as a facility.
It's just a really nice place for people to go and kind of be educated, speak to other cannabis patients and users, learn about the drug, consume it in a safe space because of all the stigma that still exists. And you know, it's challenging for patients to be able to connect with each other. So, and especially in an area where there's such high levels of drug deaths kind of nationally, I think it's great to see something like this.
Yeah, if you go back to, I think it's Michael that's been involved in Teeside Cannabis Club since the beginning, and he built an absolutely amazing relationship with Ron Hogg, who unfortunately passed away a number of years ago quite suddenly. And he was just he was a police and crime commissioner. He's just such a good, kind, liberal individual who really saw the fact that the club was just not causing trouble. It was just people going and enjoying each other's company and consuming cannabis safely without causing any bother. And I think that hard work and legacy has just meant that it can continue on. And hopefully in other areas, such schemes, clubs can be set up and operate in a way that reduces stigma and gets people
reduces
involved.
Harm, reduces stigma, and just benefits users. That was a nice positive story. Back to the negative.
Now back to this one.
So this, I feel like we've
it's like we're in a boxing match. It's like you hammer all these hammer blows.
We've had quite a lot of like non-cannabisy stories this week. Negative story. Oregon is looking like it's going back to criminalizing drug users. They took a massively progressive step in 2021. Decriminalizing possession and personal use of all drugs. This was in response to the fact that they had soaring levels of overdose deaths, and they wanted to take a more public health-based approach to drugs and not a criminal-based approach. But now they're looking at overturning this legislation, implementing jail sentences for up to 6 months for possessing small amounts of drugs, and police would also be able to confiscate drugs and stop their use in public. And looking at the article that covered this, looks like Oregon still has or is having a large spike in overdose deaths. And the 2023 audit report says the state has the second highest rate of substance use disorder, ranking 50th for treatment access, which is, I mean, not great because there's only like 50 states on there, so it's pretty low down the list. So yeah, not great. I guess there's obviously been a lot of criticism and pressure to change the decriminalization law because of these stats and people being like, well, clearly it's not working, so we need to go back to our old approach and just kind of U-turn. I guess it's too soon to be able to determine if decrim has had an impact on increasing overdoses or reducing them. And see, we're not in like the best socio-political climate, so it's not like, one factor is going to automatically change things. We can't look at causation and, we can't look at how this is causing anything, just kind of correlated. But yeah, definitely controversial, especially because they were kind of praised for how progressive and liberal this was.
I remember it being like quite an exciting moment in drug policy.
But I think it's reflective
of... It's complex, isn't it?
And we've talked about this, the fact that like I feel like there is kind of a sentiment in the States that kind of is moving more conservative again, back around drugs. The kind of new right is going against cannabis and drugs again.
Definitely turning against cannabis. And I think the challenge with these sort of policies and approaches, isn't it, is you kind of ideally don't want to create a policy change that causes such a big backlash that it then swings the policy back really far the other way. So what we know, and we're very comfortable with obviously nearly everybody that watches this, I imagine.
You're very comfortable sharing your views for those of you that haven't realised.
we're also and I think we're kind of set with it's very well understood that over-criminalisation and just constantly arresting people, I saw this firsthand, doesn't work, is incredibly problematic, increases the harm, wastes police time, just creates this constant, endless churn of criminalisation, pushes people further into isolation, deprivation. It's really, really bad. That's a problem. But on the other hand, if you just do nothing and just leave people to kind of do whatever, and again, I'm not saying criminalisation is a good thing. I'm just now let's look at the other extreme. Yeah. So the other extreme is don't arrest people for possession of drugs. Let people kind of use drugs openly in public. Don't allocate any police resources to moving on that behaviour or containing. Just kind of leave people to it and don't offer a really good alternative treatment. Say like, hey, that behaviour, you probably need some help. Then you're going to create chaos. And I think the really challenging bit that causes controversy when talking about this in the drug policy sector, and where I think we start to lose some nuance and we become very black and white on the left in the kind of public health harm reduction sphere, of which I have strong feelings and you know what I mean. I'm not outside of that by any means, but from spending 9 years working with incredibly chaotic, problematic people, problematic in the behaviour that they're exhibiting, problematic on how they were treating themselves, problematic how they were treating others, when you just offer no intervention and just be like, they'll come and get some help when they're ready. They'll come to us when they're ready and they'll sign up to that scheme or they'll go do that when they're ready. It doesn't work like that. They end up creating, for some people, not all, don't want to tie with the same brush, it creates more chaos and more harm. And then what happens is, I agree that someone using drugs out in the street publicly, for them and that individual, is less harmful than them just being arrested and thrown in jail and then going around again. However, the public nature of them using drugs is harmful to society. Mm-hmm. And I like that's a generalized view. It's not necessarily a personal opinion. If you were to just go out and speak to people and they would, I think I don't want to see people using drugs in the street. I don't as you know, as much as I'm very liberal on drugs, I don't want to see people out in the street being really intoxicated using drugs. I don't like it when I see it with people absolutely smashing the street.
Yeah, I don't like alcohol. Yeah,
I don't like it. And when people are exhibiting chaotic, problematic behaviour, society quickly goes, we've had enough of this. And the problem Oregon have now got is the pressure from people that don't like what they're seeing. They will go back to, well, let's just criminalise and shut people in jail again. And we miss I think the left and the right.
The massive bit in the middle. Yeah,
there needs to be a line in the sand that goes, look, do you know what? You're constantly using drugs in the street. And you're like, we're going to have to do something about it.
And some of the, some people do need structured interventions where they can get help.
For sure. And we're not saying that is like, just throw them in jail for the rest of their lives. But so you have to have a line in the sand that goes, it's the same thing with the the shop theft and stuff that's happened a lot of West Coast America, where it's a misdemeanor if you steal under a certain amount. So it's just like insane amounts of shoplifting. There's just like people being like, well, I may as well go shoplift. And we can understand the situations people get in and broader socio-economic factors that result in that kind of behaviour. But it's still like, if you just remove all the lines and say, do whatever, then people are like, do you know what? I think I will. And people don't like that. So it's frustrating to see that.
But I think there's with seeing this, I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned around how, progressive policies can be implemented that bring people that are conservative on a journey that can, by the end result agree and come to like a common ground. Because that's the goal at the end of the day, because there's no benefit in implementing a really, really progressive policy that within a few years is going to U-turn and like piss everyone off on both sides.
The bit that the left constantly miss when they talk about drug policy, and again, I'm not putting myself outside of those positions, is that you can do a lot of evidence to show that strong harm reduction policies are better for that individual and cause less harm. I agree with that stance. I agree with that position. I'm hugely pro harm reduction. My whole career has sat around the sphere of harm reduction. However, there are some people that believe that drugs are immoral, and someone being able to use publicly and that be seen, or just be able to use drugs, is morally wrong.
Yeah, there's definitely people sit within that camp.
No, that's not okay. And
alcohol being one of those.
Yeah, so what happens is the left go, evidence-based policy shows that harm reduction policies are best, but it shows that those policies are best at reducing harm for that individual. What it doesn't show is all the stuff we've talked about with Jonathan Haidt's work, that doesn't, if you have a moral position that using drugs is not okay and dangerous and harmful for society, I think it's not a position I hold, but it's a very, very popular common position outside in the real world, then you are going to look at those policies and go, that's not evidence. That's evidence of chaos. That's not evidence of structure and order and being physically and mentally well. And the bit we'll keep talking about this for years to come is the changing, because of the politics is shifting and left is becoming quite authoritarian and kind of like do this, do that, controlling. And the right is going back to its kind of like true libertarian roots of like freedom. People do what they want. You've seen this like polar shift, and the right, despite them being libertarians, who you would think, oh, they're kind of fine with drugs, they're now going like, well, actually getting out your head and changing how you see the world and feel about the world is not a good thing. And we're seeing them push back against cannabis. We're seeing them push back against policies like this. And like with Trump, likely to be either the president or incredibly influential in the policy landscape. Yeah. I really fear for America in terms of what some of those policies look like. The right is definitely switching, going from, maybe cannabis could create an economy and jobs and like it's quite a good idea actually, to people shouldn't take drugs. What is this? This is a left-wing thing. Let's stamp it all out, which it'll be awful. Sorry, that was a side rant.
Yeah, no, but I completely agree. I think there's just a need to find some balance between topics that are controversial for the real world. Because I think the drug policy space kind of, we are in such an echo chamber. We all, to the significant majority, we all kind of agree with each other and, agree on these policies. Whereas I think we forget that there's such a massive portion of the population that doesn't agree with this and, doesn't understand drug policy. And there's definitely like an education and like awareness point. I think through education and awareness, you can reduce stigma. When people are in a mindset to be educated, they're like, okay, cool, that makes sense. But you have to get them to that point. And there are people, like you said, that are just morally against drug use and don't want to see more of it, don't like these policies.
Now the problem is they're now seeing it in America. They're now because of like two things have happened. There's like the rise of social media and the fact that you're carrying like a high quality phone with you,
so you can just film and view all this stuff at all times.
You just do it all the time. So now it's not hard to go online and just see, scenes that shouldn't make anybody feel good. It shouldn't make it, even the most kind of like liberal harm reduction advocate will look at scenes and think that's kind of sad. I hope all those people are okay. Like I want those people to get help. They're not going to look at me like, oh, great, open drug use again. And there is an interesting point to make that those people are going to use drugs. So if you don't let them do it on the street, they're kind of just doing it somewhere else. And like that we're not saying that's great either, but people doing it out openly on the street just creates this strong backlash. It makes a strong discussion argument back for like drug consumption rooms and places by which people want to choose drugs. It's contained, it's safe, it's managed, great ideas, great schemes, superb initiatives. But they're kind of like, just leave people to do whatever, use it on the street. It's just creating such a strong pushback.
Yeah, I guess, in conclusion, it's really frustrating what's happening in Oregon, and we definitely shouldn't be going back to criminalizing people. No, but you can you can understand the point of view as to how policymakers have gotten into that position because of what's going on and the public getting
and something in the middle is always going to work. It's always about sensible middle ground policy. Don't go to policy extremes.
Like prohibition's one extreme. You don't want to go to the total opposite of that just to swing back that way.
It just creates policy chaos. Come on, next one. This must be positive.
Next one. No.
Come on, catch it. What have we got now?
So France is banning flour for their medical market.
Great, brilliant, nice.
Medical pilot program.
More great news.
Yeah, I know. I'm hoping we'll get some like positive springtime stories soon.
Next week, positive stories only.
But so France has a pilot program for medical cannabis, and they've announced that the program will now cease providing flour to patients, meaning that patients will have no legal access route to secure cannabis flour. I think this is pretty surprising, and I've seen on Twitter it's outraged a couple of people, especially I think given the number of patients that benefit from flour and the fact that obviously flour has loads of benefits because of the quick onset time. You vape it and you can feel effects quite quickly, so that's really good for like breakthrough pain and things like that if people are having spasms. I think it's a bit divisive. I think that there's definitely, and I can definitely agree that there's a need to kind of go down a medicalization route for Europe in some ways. Definitely goes down to the points that we've said around kind of stigma and trying to bring on the cannabis naive and make it more mainstream. So I can see how a lot of cannabis naive patients might not be going down a flower route as a first point of access and, wanting something like a tablet or a capsule or an oil or a, inhaler or something. But, I think it's really important that we don't forget about the cannabis-aware patients and patients that have been using cannabis for a really long time and that flower works for them. So, I think it just gets to that point of, why do we have to choose, a medicalization route over, a classic cannabis medication
What's the logic here? What's the, what's the policy?
I don't know. I think my instinct is that obviously flour isn't stable. So flour is from a trial and research.
Less stable. That's why it's so difficult putting flour into an RCT, right?
Yeah.
Because of creating product stability.
Yeah.
So it loses out.
Yeah. So you can. So I guess from that research and medical research point of view, that's why it would be excluded. But I don't know. Part of me can't help but think that maybe there's some vested interests in lobbying from companies that are supplying extract products and trying to get a very, very strict medicalized product on the market.
This is going to be the biggest challenge Europe has got, right? Because we have talked about this on the show. We talked about this at conferences, on stages, and networking privately. Cannabis is really complicated. It's an emerging, even though we've used it since forever as humans, it is really, we're really early on, aren't we, in that kind of the medicalization of it and even open legal recreational use of it. And there is definitely a blurring of what is medical use and what is recreational use. And the clinicians don't like to admit it. Clinics get upset sometimes when you talk about it. It likes to be no, this is a medical product, it's a family. And we know it is, and it's great. And it's amazing. It's an amazing product. And there are many companies making flour, which is having an incredible benefit on people that are using it. Hopefully that's not a medical claim that I've just got us in trouble. I'm just speaking, I've heard from other people. That
we're not doctors.
We're not doctors, and we're not naming any strains. We just know that there are people using products and it's helping them a great deal. But there is definitely a challenge in separating what is absolutely medical flower use and what is recreational flower use and what is in the middle. There is because when we were doing the webinar this week, someone said, asked a question. I think I just answered it live rather than putting it through to panelists.
Yeah. Was it around like, are doctors scared of cannabis because people enjoy it? Yeah.
And I thought that's actually that's actually a great question. There was tons of questions. I thought I can just kind of answer that. I was like, that's a great point. There is definitely part of that. There's definitely an element of you use this medication and then very quickly feel something, which is you feel something. And that feeling is the same reason why cannabis is the most commonly used recreational illegal drug in the entire world. Like, cannabis is number one because it's a good drug, it's an enjoyable drug for people to use. And again, I'm not encouraging people to use it illegally, blah, 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 blah. But it's true. Like, why is cannabis the most commonly used recreational drug in the world? Well, because
because it's enjoyable.
It's enjoyable. It doesn't have loads of side effects. Like, if you compare it to other drugs, which will change how someone thinks for days on end,
or drugs where you
sleeping.
Yeah, or drugs where you have an amazing recreational experience, but then you have a come down for like a week.
Yeah,
so then you're like, okay,
smashes it.
Yeah, so
cannabis is very unique. It's alcohol-esque, which is why people like alcohol. Small amount, small feeling, have more, bigger feeling. It's like
you've got that like what is it? At a low dose, it has a specific effect, but at a high dose, it's got like the opposite effect. So you can, there's a whole range of experiences and effects and uses that you can have for it.
So that tension point exists so heavily in the medical market that Europe's endeavour to go hard medical is going to cause so many problems. Because what we've seen in the US is, we've got medical, but what was great about North American reform is they just saw that, like, you get this medical card in the US,
and then just go
and people kind of know that's kind of like recreational, but also like for the people that wanted to use it medically, they could use it medically as well. So you didn't get stuck in the bureaucratic technicality of the pharmaceutical industry and RCTs. And I'm not trying to say that all those things are bad.
Yeah, they are.
I'm I'm very pro that because I
don't know why we need to choose one over the other. Like, we should be doing research in RCTs and finding, very specific extract formulations that can benefit people. If that means that we can get some form of cannabis on the NHS more broadly, amazing. If that can, benefit, old grannies that would never smoke flower and touch cannabis, but, can benefit from cannabis in a capsule format or something, amazing. But like, I don't understand why we can't just also allow patients to use flower.
This will keep back. It's why I think you need, this will upset a lot of people, I don't care. This is why you need both.
Yeah.
For a medical market to truly reach a potential by which...
And reduce harm. Like, I think it all comes down to reducing harm. If you're going to cease providing flower to patients, well, all those patients are going to go back to the illegal market. Like, what else are they going to do?
Agree. It's a problem. I think the UK... We're in a situation where we are excited by products and innovations which offer an alternative to flower because it can push back against stigma and sidestep the stigma. We're excited about that rather than it being like, flower's no place. I think flower definitely has a place in the medical market. It's just fitting that into the existing bureaucracy of the way in which we control and operate medicines is going to be very, very difficult. I know people that will have heard my comments about medical, and I've had people challenge me on it directly, and with very good point that, like, if you have recreation, it just kind of smashes medical out of the way and people forget about it, and I think that is a policy tension point that needs to be ironed out. We see this in Canada, we've seen this in the US, where legal recreational markets kind of just like smash medical to the side, and there are a lot of people that want that medicalisation and want those RCTs, and that I think I'm confident that you can have a policy landscape in which those two things do exist. Mm-hmm. It's just because it's such a new emerging area of medicine and reform. In North America, we've seen those kind of programs come in, and it has kind of pushed medical to one side. If you're a flower patient, it's great. But if you're not a flower patient, you could be looking saying, I don't want to vape flower. Why all of a sudden is it just nothing but flower? And all these medical companies have flipped to recreational. I want oils. I want topical. What is it?
Topical. Yeah.
Topical.
Tropicals.
I want tropicals. I think that is a really valid point. But ultimately, my interest is in how do we reduce harm, and how do we give people access and freedom to make choices over what they do and put into their body with as much safe information as possible.
Yeah. So another frustrating story. But I mean, I'm hoping that this is, just isolated in France. I hope it doesn't kind of spread across Europe.
No, I think Europe's a mess. I don't think any of this is good. I think we're seeing in the past year a pushback from policymakers around cannabis in Europe, I think it will carry on. I think that is just another short. That's another thing to mark on the board as like Europe is struggling, and I think Germany. I think the optimism about Germany going to the second pillar is misplaced. I think it's going to stop at the first one, and I think it will still be a challenging landscape even at the first pillar. I think what is certain or not certain, that's staff thing to say. What is very likely and really positive is decriminalisation. Excellent, reduced criminalisation.
But in terms of innovation and just creating an industry.
I want to see industry and innovation. I want to see choice for consumer. I want it to be exciting. I want jobs. I want it to be this exciting new
to have choice.
Like in America. I know that stresses some people out because it involves capitalism, which if you're left wing isn't very trendy to like capitalism. But I want to be excited. I want people to be excited about the market.
And yeah, we're not getting a whole lot of that now. We're just getting backlash.
So boring. It's so boring. It is so.
Yeah, let's make cannabis fun again.
Yeah, it should be. It should be fun. There's so many of these policies and ideas that are just super dull.
But we've got kind of a fun one at the end. This one's
finish on something fun. It's always good to finish on something fun. Go on, you set the scene. I'll set a video.
Yeah, so we seen this on Twitter doing the rounds. A German hip hop influencer has endorsed a cannabis product. And I think it's struck a bit of a debate around whether influencers should be allowed to advertise medical cannabis. So there's a lot of like legal questions around, is that even legal? Can that be done? But I guess this ties in really nicely with our last point around the kind of blurring of medical and recreational, what that means and how we should feel about it.
So should watch the video and then chat about it. Yeah. There are some interesting questions. Move your laptop screen.
Yeah.
Denn am Ende ist nur wichtig, dass es brennt.
Interesting.
Well, yeah, pretty.
Not sure about the music.
Yeah, not my music taste, but yeah.
This does lead perfectly from what we're just saying.
Yeah, yeah.
I find it. There's an irony, isn't there, that the medical market in the UK is kind of stuck. It's not stuck, but there's like 30,000 patients. It's gone up again now. People are saying 35,000, but whatever.
Yeah.
30,000-ish
patients. Whatever the number is. But
I think there's some sort of comment that there's like 1 million in Australia now, 1 million medical patients, and hundreds of thousands in Europe. We are so far behind in terms of making the public aware, and it is just an endless conversation over and over again with multiple people, and those frustrations are incredibly well placed. So the sector in the UK is kind of like, oh, we really need to let people know. But at the same time, there's this like, well, it's medical. There's
a massive tension point.
There's also an irony that like, if you really wanted, if you wanted to hyper-accelerate the UK market, one, it would be about quick advertising. But two, it would be about things like this. It would be saying, do you know what? Let's blur some lines. If you truly want to get people's attention, stop them thinking that medical cannabis, because when someone says medical cannabis, they think like, okay, bureaucracy,
a bit boring.
It's not the NHS, it's going to be really expensive. So like the fact that you are over medicalizing the product also creates another barrier.
Yeah.
People being like, well, I'm not going to.
I can't get it,
Big Nasty doing the one recently was interesting because his association for his music and as like a fun character that you would associate with recreational cannabis use because of all the things he's said and done publicly about consuming weed. Those sort of initiatives are the ones that will like get the public thinking, oh, maybe I'll go check out cannabis.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, you want viral marketing to be able to drive patients and just create some awareness about the fact that it's legal. And yeah, it will create some tension points and some hesitation around the medical community. But again, it's like once again, it's like, why can't we have both? Like, why can't we do have this medicalized version of it, and there are patients that are truly 100% medical, would have never touched it recreationally, use it from like a medical device point, or don't really want to consume it from a flower point. But then there are people that aren't gonna feel that way. So I just don't see why we can't just create a bit of viral marketing and awareness to just drive the public to know about it.
There's a clinics that definitely, you've seen like alleged partnerships with influencers or groups or individuals who kind of talk about it to try and bring their audience in. And you see some groups like the Medica are just spending what is obviously tons of money on just spamming out press releases and they've gone for the let's just spam PR endlessly.
Let's just create stories.
Let's just create endless kind of mainstream stuff, which I'm not saying is ineffective. It's definitely a technique which is going to get people being aware of
going to get eyeballs.
Aware of the product. I guess there's there is a tension point perhaps in the future politically if the sector goes too far. Whether a Labour government, which is likely, the likely landscape, whether there would be something a Labour government would ever really push back against, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, maybe there'd be more regulation, but I can't ever see a world in which they're like, okay, we're making medical cannabis illegal once again. That's not going to happen.
I can't see them going back. If we zoom out and think about Europe and just the fragility of reform in Europe and the way in which the politicians behave around these issues, you can imagine some concerns around the medical market starting to look to recreational. And again, I'm not of the opinion that the UK government will push back around it. I'm just expressing I can understand where people's tensions exist. But the other issue the medical market in the UK's got, and Germany with moves like this, although culturally I think they're much further ahead in terms of stigma than us because of the discussions that are taking place. But and I know from talking to clinicians that this would stress them out.
Yeah.
A lot of clinicians who are like, I don't like this whole recreational.
I don't want to be seen as the weed doctor.
Yeah. There's some doctors that don't care, but the overwhelming majority do, and they don't want to be seeing people where they think this is just someone on the slide. And there's a tension point that exists in the medical market by which the doctors, as we heard from Ilan in the webinar we did in the week, they should never be incentivized to prescribe or behave in a certain way. The doctor should be the kind of impartial bit of the medical model, and the clinic is making money based upon someone's choice to use certain cultivars, and the pharmacy's making money, and the
clinician should be the one where that.
The clinician should be separate, but the clinician is a key link. So, if companies start acting in a way that feels super rec and kind of
it's going to put the clinician in an uncomfortable position.
They're best to have a good relationship with a clinician because it's the clinician that ultimately is going to have to be prescribing and acting.
Definitely, but I guess just on another point, I think it's really some people are going to get annoyed by this, and I know there's been a lot of backlash around whether influencers should be allowed to do this. A lot of people saying no. But personally, across Europe, there are so few influencers and public figures that are supportive of cannabis. In the States, cannabis culture has been a massive subculture and thing for ages. You've got Seth Rogen and James Franco and all these, big celebrities that have come out and, you've got Snoop Dogg in support of cannabis. And even though, some of those influencers aren't everyone's cup of tea, there's a lot of public figures that are super vocal about their cannabis use and supportive of it. In Europe, that's really, really lacking. I mean, in the UK specifically, there's no public, there's so few celebrities that are supportive of it. Yeah. So I think seeing public figures come on board and support things publicly through, their influencer network is a good thing because it's so limited at the moment. And
it just shows how strong the stigma is though, doesn't it? So when I've tried to have conversations with artists or groups, influencers around this, high profile ones, they go, do you know what, I'm really supportive, but I
would never say it publicly.
Well, they don't want it to impact on their other brands. They're I've got some really good brands that sponsor me, clothing brands, makeup brands, and they're it don't really fit with them, and they pay me loads of money. So the stigma is so strong in the UK that it just creates this ambivalence from people who do use cannabis from engaging with it. Yeah. It always comes back to stigma. It's what we were talking about the other day. Maybe the
stigma
is awareness is obviously important. If someone's not aware, they can't express stigma. So in a way, awareness has to be first, because how can you express stigma if you don't even know it's a thing you can get? But I think that stigma barrier is absolutely just getting, every year we're realising how astronomical that stigma barrier is, and it just calls for the need for not just us as a community, but society to start demonstrating to the public what cannabis is and helping do some education, campaigning, awareness raising in the right way.
Yeah. So
that was a lot. That was so much.
Yeah, a lot. A lot of
I hope people are completely deflated by the end of that.
We'll try and find some positive ones next week.
Next week,
but
we'll bring
a lot of food for thought, and I think all like really, really important discussions, because I think there can be kind of a artificial positivity in the cannabis sector sometimes, and I think it's really important to kind of burst that bubble and look at it how it is, because I think if we keep lying to ourselves, like, things aren't going to get better. So we need to like confront it with, okay, this is what the state of play actually looks like. This is what we're dealing with. How do we?
There is. I'll say this on video on record, because I'm just getting to the point where I'm speaking my mind way too often. There is just so much nonsense at panels and events, discussions online of people saying, "Oh, here's my take and analysis." You are just saying what you need to say to either keep an investor or a certain group happy.
Yeah, or just saying, or plugging your business model because that's what you want to be true.
Listen, it happened. Look what happened in the Canadian market. The Canadian market completely imploded just before COVID, and the reason it imploded is a bunch of people thought it's a way to make a quick bit of money. I'm going to turn up. We're gonna capture 80% of the illicit market, 90%. We're gonna have this much market share, and it was just hyperinflated nonsense, not based on reality, not by talking to people on the ground. Crucially, by not understanding the cannabis sector. And understanding the cannabis sector means understanding the illegal, illicit market. It's not just like, well, I understand the sector. I know how to get a license. Brilliant. Do you understand what types of strains, cultivars of cannabis people are using? Do you understand how they consume it? Do you understand how quickly they get it and the cost they get it at? Do you understand the relationship they've built with their current supplier?
How do you break all of that down?
Yeah. How do you address that? And people thought, well, it's legal, so people just jump so they don't get in trouble. Just all this nonsense and all these assumptions that completely destroyed millions of people. Have lost millions and millions of dollars. Like, it's a huge impact on many people that invest in that space, all based on nonsense. And what we're now seeing in Europe is the same thing. Yeah. This is going to happen. That's going to happen.
Germany's going to change the landscape.
It's like, well, if it goes all the way to Pillar 2, and then it will. It will change the landscape. But like people get blinded by their positivity, and positivity is a beautiful thing. It's an awesome thing. We need it. We need it to drive forward.
But we also need to be critical.
Still got to be reality. It's still got to be grounded in reality. And unfortunately, a lot of the discussions or conferences or events that take place by which people are given a platform to sell rather than to talk policy, that creates even more of the nonsense. We should have discussions, debates, and interactions that are based on what's really going on, not, oh, do you want to go up on a stage and tell everybody what you need to say to kind of raise a bit more money? No, don't do that. No more. Stop that. Don't walk in that room. Anyway, that was sideline. That was good. That was good. A good chat. A good amount of stuff. Negative but constructive, and there are ways to move forwards with all these things.
Yeah. Hope everyone's found it constructive and
hope everyone still wants to work in the sector and enjoy it.
We'll see you guys next time.
Yeah. For more Vault Fast positive industry news stories. Cheers, everyone.